narrowing the aperture term too.
We've talked a lot on this pod about the power law. And the truth of the matter is, whether we're talking about AI or software or anything else that, people are going to be funding, it's 10% of the investments that are going to yield 90% of the returns. And so they're looking at that and saying, who are the top 10 firms in Silicon Valley? I either want to get allocation to those firms who are seeing the best deals, converting the best deals, and are selective, like Sachs talked about, or we just don't want to allocate. And so I think, what we saw over the last 2 years, Jason, was an explosion of new funds, an explosion of new, first-time, second-time funds. I think subscale, small funds with no DPI, they're going to find a really, really tough time, to Chamath's point about DPI raising capital. And you're going to see the scale players scale.
So part of that is clearing out the inventory from the last cycle. 2 news stories this week about companies, maybe struggling. Sequoia got off the board of Citizen. If you don't know Citizen, that's that app that tells you where crimes are happening in your city. Very popular in San Francisco. It's literally goes off every 90 seconds. It's pretty dystopian. That company, Citizen, which is a pretty cool app, has raised $130 million to date. Sequoia led the Series A in 2017. They did a pay-to-play round. If you don't know what that is, basically, if you don't invest, you get crammed down. How does the cram down work? Well, your shares in the company went down 10-1, and you probably got moved to common shares as opposed to preferred, which has a series of protections. They get their money out first, yada, yada. But Sequoia refused to participate according to this FT story. Again, Sequoia did not comment on this. It's kind of something you don't do as a VC when something goes bad at a company and you leave the board. You generally don't want to say bad things or taint the company any more than leaving the board does. So a bunch of cram downs happening. And then dovetailing with that, Instacart, according to the Wall Street Journal, had a big Q4 as it prepares to go public. Instacart, if you remember, we talked about it on the show, cut its internal valuation 75% last year from $39 billion to $10 billion, according to sources. Instacart's Q4 results, according to the Wall Street Journal, up more than 50%, even though order volume grew only 16%. Why? They turned advertising on the app, just like Uber and Amazon. A lot of these commerce folks are building ad business inside of theirs. So what do you think about what's happening as we clear out this private? Anybody have thoughts on Instacart or the cram down rounds? We can go either way with this, and then we'll go to public.
I wouldn't focus too much on those 2 companies. I think what we're going to see in the second half of 23 and all of 24 is a lot of medicine being taken, a lot of down rounds, a lot of structure. It's going to be a tale of 2 cities. The hot area, AI is going to continue to receive new investment, and all these companies that, that receive peak valuations in 2021 are going to have a day of reckoning. Either, if they're lucky, maybe they have a flat round or modestly up round, but a lot of them are going to have down rounds or restructurings. And that's just going to be going on for the next year and a half. What's
your philosophy, Sachs, on leaving a board? This is a really dicey issue. When you give up on a company, what's the best practice there? How do you do it without damaging the company? Obviously, the founder relationship is going to be hard. What have you learned about this as a private market investor?
Well, I think that sometimes we flip board members internally at Kraft just because people have different amounts of capacity. That's not a statement at all about the way Kraft feels about the company. It's just a reflection of our individual bandwidths or whose expertise are needed at that time. But when the firm itself quits a board, I think there's no way to read that other than, a statement of protest. And I don't know what happened at that company, but it seems to me that, again, it could be a sign that the venture firm isn't happy with the way that they're being treated.
The cram down, Chamath, that's a bitter pill to swallow. Why would founders do this cram down instead of just adding a little more to the top? And is there a way to do this without, going scorched earth or poisoning the well, as it were? Again, putting this app and Sequoia aside, this happening all over the ecosystem. So is there a way to do this gracefully, or is it just going to be messy?
I think it's going to be really messy. To state the obvious, no venture capital investor ever quits the board voluntarily of a great company that's doing well. That would be dumb. So as David said, sort of like the proof is in the pudding there. And at the same time, there are a lot of companies who don't want to see the writing on the wall and will do all kinds of gymnastics to try to stick a landing on a contorted financing. And sometimes those things have real consequences to other investors who just don't think it's the right thing to do. I wouldn't read too much into this, except that good founders have a responsibility to do what's right for themselves and their employees. Nobody else. And the thing to keep in mind,
not the investors, really?
No, I think you absolutely have to prioritize the people doing the actual work. And if you actually did prioritize them, what you would probably say to yourself is, oh my gosh, there are people who I work with, who I look in the eye every day. Because investors you'll see once a quarter. But I have my fellow employees as a founder, that I look in the eyes every day, who've been toiling with me for umpteen hours a day, every day for years. And they are now totally underwater. What is the right thing to do for them? And I think if you just answer that question, you wouldn't do all these contorted things. You would just reset the valuation. You would refresh the equity pool. You would issue options back out to those employees, and you would move on. It's all these other things that get in the way of answering that simple question where people fuck it up.
I've done that before.
Sachs, if you don't have a team and you don't have a motivated team, you have nothing.
I've done that before. I don't want to rehash one of my more miserable experiences, but I was dealing with a company that had a grossly inflated valuation. It was a total problem case. We voluntarily slashed the valuation in half and reissued options to the employees to keep them motivated.
No big deal.
So yeah, exactly. And
it's not that it's no big deal, but it requires some amount of fortitude and understanding your priorities, I guess.
Well, Chamath, that's it.
What do you think? Yeah.
First, I think it's revealing that we think what happened here is so out of the ordinary. I mean, you flash back to 2001 to 2004, Sequoia, I don't think funded a single loser in their portfolio, right? Like, that's a time where you walked away from the ones that weren't winning and you fed the ones that were, because you have limited capital and you don't know when you're going to raise your next capital. This idea that you have unlimited capital, you can give money to anybody no matter what they're doing with respect to their plan, I think is a function of the last 10 years. But to Chamath's point, the idea of tough talk, either out of CEOs or out of board members, has been in short supply in Silicon Valley. This idea that saying the truth, just speaking the words about needing to get fit or needing to lower the valuation, that somehow that is found